Welcome into another episode of Behind the Wheel, sponsored by Bobby Rail Honda of State College. Go check out their showroom on West College Ave. We're in one of their beautiful Honda Pilots today. My guest, Tyler Donohue of Lions 24/7. Tyler, thanks for coming on.
Always a pleasure, Landon.
Absolutely. Tyler, I believe you were the first person to ever interview me. I think I wasn't actually in high school yet. I think I was still technically an 8th grader. So that's
You're making me sound creepy. It's part of the job sometimes,
it is.
people.
You're right. That did sound really bad. It is part of the job. Tyler was the first one to figure me out a little bit, and we ever since then, man, been on Lions 24/7 countless times. So it's a pleasure to have you on my channel, obviously, and we're gonna ride around, talk a little bit of Penn State football 2025 season. Tyler, I feel like from what I saw, I think you were the first one to kind of get the beat on what we now know as the Chazmanian Devil, who is Chaz Coleman. It's just blown up these past couple days. I think defensive end was a huge worry. I mean, Donohue, we know what Donohue's going to be. I think even Zariah Fisher, we feel good about him in his 6th year, but still someone been injured 2 times majorly, and it was kind of like already a question mark at DN2, and then who's going to be behind him? I feel like some worries have been put to rest. What have you seen, heard, feeling about defensive end, but specifically our guy, Chazmanian Devil?
Yeah, it's amazing what 2 weeks of practice can apparently do, right? I mean, you were on my podcast maybe 3 weeks ago. We were talking about defensive end as a concern, and we didn't talk a bunch about Chaz Coleman. We talked about his potential. He's a guy I personally was like, all right, let's file him away. Let's see what he looks like in spring 2026. He might be a beast by then. Seems like he's a beast right now. I mean, through the first few practices, for the story I wrote last Monday on our site, kind of breaking down the early buzz about this kid, it wasn't just that he was this long, physical force, which he was at over 240 pounds. Now he's 250, 6'4", giving guys a lot of issues with a variety of moves that I think surprised them based on his lack of experience at defensive end at the high school level. But I heard the same things about his personality as a guy who showed up. Yes, sir. No, sir. I heard some good feedback about him sticking around, cleaning some stuff up. James Franklin brings up that same thing about 10 days later. So it's been consistent from enough people within the facility, on the record, off the record. And we haven't seen a lot of Chaz Coleman, but I'll tell you what, he's one of those dudes where they don't have to be a drill. You just watch that cluster of defensive linemen standing around. He pops off the field because of the way he's built. And then you start to hear about the way he's wired and what he's doing on the practice field. And you think, forget about spring 2026. This may be a guy that needs to do something against Ohio State November 1st, 2025.
You're absolutely right. I mean, from what I've seen, we were talking off camera, I feel like it's going to be hard to keep him off the field, especially on 3rd downs when it's like, hey, it's 3rd and 7 versus Ohio State. How can you not put him out there if he is the type of guy that we've seen him to be already so far? I mean, talking to the offensive linemen, they're saying he is, I don't want to call him unblockable. He's not unblockable. He's not Abdul Carter yet, but he's still 18 years old. But I mean,
I've talked to some offensive linemen. They are admittedly trying to figure this kid out, and that's something I haven't really heard about a young defensive end, especially a guy who's got 2 weeks. And the word on Coleman was like, give him some time. He played quarterback. He was running routes at high school level. And so for us to hear from starting caliber offensive linemen who have played a bunch of Big Ten games and saying, I got to figure out what this guy's doing to me, that says a lot.
I'm right there with you. I think he's gonna have a big year, and we need it. I think there was big questions there. Yvonne Kamaju, someone else. We had 2 true freshman defensive end have a pretty big impact. I mean, I don't know if we're going to – I'm curious because I feel like last year, interchangeably, the defensive line, you could just take out 4 guys and plug in 4 new guys because it was the deepest group, I think, on the team. Mm-hmm. And very quickly that changed, and it was a lot of question marks, and we always said that, hey, there's a lot of talent there, but it's a lot of unproven talent. Well, I think the young talent is starting to prove themselves a little bit. So I'm starting to feel better about defensive end. Where are you kind of defensive tackle? How are you feeling? I know we've heard some good things about Xavier Gilliam, but outside of that, what's kind of your vibe? And then too, Alonzo Ford was playing great, but we all know, I mean, coming back from injury isn't super easy when it's a major knee injury.
I've been encouraged on the feedback with Alonzo Ford throughout training camp so far. Sounds like he has been really stout against the run, which has been the word on him throughout his college career, really. But it seems like he can be that centerpiece next to Zane Durant, be able to free up the preseason All-American in some space. But I think we'll see a lot of Xavier Gilliam. I've heard good things about Owen Wafel, who came in from Michigan last year. He didn't play at Michigan last year, but he spent a year in a big-time Big Ten environment. I think that helped him stepping foot on campus. It's not like he made a leap. He is a guy that that I think people don't know about his recruitment as much because Penn State wasn't heavily involved there, but he was running in the 4.8 range. He was dunking basketballs, and he's only like a 6'2" defensive lineman. So there's a lot to work with athletically for a pretty compact guy. But Ty Blanding's kind of been the buzziest name in terms of guys who have been around for a bit. He's a redshirt sophomore now. He's always been athletic, always had that lateral quickness, but it sounds like in talking to some people at Penn State, he's starting to put it together, understand how to use that leverage, use some of that added mass that he has put on. Liam Andrews is a wild card to me. I loved him as a two-way lineman coming into high school. I think we got to give him more time. He was sidelined last year. Let him kind of sink his teeth in this position. But I'm with you. We've got a lot to learn. I think what's big about defensive end, defensive tackle, also linebacker depth is those 3 non-conference games where you're going to be a 40-point favorite for a few weeks in a row there. And if things go according to plan, there's no reason why the Penn State staff shouldn't be able to collect a lot of film, good and bad, on a bunch of these young players and try to tighten them up a little bit heading into Big Ten action.
Yeah, that's a great point. A lot of fans, and I was even talking to people this morning, grumpy about the non-conference, I call them slappies. They're not good games. So like you said, we're going to be favored by a lot. And I will say this. I do feel like the best thing is that Penn State is great across the board. And at some positions, we have great depth. But those positions where we have talent but unproven depth, like you said, it's a great opportunity to get them 3 games in a row where all of them can play. And I feel like it can't be understated how important that is, because if you've never played and then you need to go out against Ohio State or even a Nebraska and you're a young guy, that's intimidating. But if I've already played 3 times, I'm all right, I've done this. I understand what it takes. The competition might not have been there, but, just doing it. I blacked out on my first play versus Rutgers.
Yeah.
Completely blacked out. Don't remember any of it. I was like, oh crap, okay. Let's try to lock this thing back in. And so, I think that's awesome. And Franklin's so big on getting as many guys as possible reps, because especially now, could play a 17-game season. That's pretty crazy.
I mean, look at the ramp up though, Landon. You've got those 3 games. You get all that film to figure out. Then you have 2 weeks until the whiteout. You got a bye week. So to me, it's pretty much tailor-made for this, from a personnel standpoint, to figure out what works, what doesn't. Because you're right. You don't want somebody coming up for air in a whiteout setting against Oregon and trying to figure out how to play football. You'd rather them do that when you're up 42-7 in the third quarter against a non-conference opponent. Yeah. And I think to add to that, while we're talking about this competition and stuff, Ethan Grunkemeyer, Jackson Smolik, if I'm the Penn State staff, unless I get to August 29th and I'm very clearly see who my QB2 is, I'm inclined to get both of those guys game work through those first 3 games. Then I should have a real good indication of who is next man up behind Drew.
Yeah, I think, honestly, let's talk about them next, but outside of the wide receivers, I think that's almost the biggest storyline of those first 3 weeks is let's see who's going to be QB2 and, in turn, probably QB1 in 2026. So I think that's something that Penn State fans are going to be really excited to watch. And we'll be able to, it gives us an excuse to continue to air it out a little bit when it's, like you said, 49-7. Yeah. So, and it's been a while since our opener. I think 2019 was the last time we had an opener that was a non-good team. That was Idaho, when Brandon Smith obliterated that guy and CJ Thorpe fell to his knees. That was a hilarious clip. But since then we've had, don't need to talk about 2020, but outside it's been good. Mm-hmm. So now I'm excited for that. Let's talk a little bit. I think there's other places to talk about on defense, but let's leave that to the side a little bit. Wide receivers. I think there's a couple things to talk about. There's a couple young guys that are really showing themselves. But let's talk about what everybody wants to talk about, the 3 transfers, and kind of what have you heard, seen, and just being around practice from those guys. I will say, it seems like Kyron Hudson is the favorite to kind of be the dude.
I'll tell you what, he has made a move, hasn't he? And that says something, because I think you looked at the raw stats, which we tend to do with receivers and skill players. You just see what they did last year. And he had the weakest stat line out of the 3. But then you realize what USC was going through. They were a mess offensively for much of the season. They benched their quarterback. He was a team captain out there. By all accounts, he was a real linchpin for them as a leader during a really challenging season where your coach is being talked about on the hot seat. And so it's hard, I think, to read into catches, yards, and touchdowns and say, this is what this guy's going to be for you. Because I don't think that we're going to see Devontae Ross and Trevor Pena necessarily match their statistical output when they were, in more prolific spots. I think what you want to see is balance from this group. And Kyron Hudson has always been that contested catch king, someone where Drew Aller can throw it with more confidence. I feel like that has been an issue the last couple of years, is where he can actually put the ball in some contested windows and have the confidence that his guy is going to come down with that. And I think that's where really you've seen Kyron Hudson excel throughout his career. With Devontae Ross, the word would probably be slippery. I know they love what he did last year on the road at Iowa, a couple touchdown catches, a punt return for a touchdown. And ultimately, when you watch Devontae Ross in the field so far in practice action, he just glides around, and he has a different burst. I saw him track down a deep toss from Ethan Grunkemeyer on the practice field, and he closing speed was a little bit different than what we had probably seen on the practice field last year. And then with Trevor Pena, just a real natural feel is kind of the word you get. And natural feel for this locker room, cultural fit, a guy who's already kind of showing those leadership traits. Him and Kyron Hudson were captains on their last team. But I think with Pena he's someone who finds that zone of the defense, settles in, and just can really chomp and attack you. He may not be the guy who goes 70 yards down the field, but he'll pick up those 3rd and 6s with a 7 or 8 yard grab, consistently move the chain. So I think I got 2 feet on the bandwagon for all 3 of these transfer players. And I can tell you this, I spoke with Marcus Hagans on Tuesday night after practice, and he has never been more loose. He has never been more open. He has never been more energetic, and he has never been more happy. And he said he's having fun about 6 times. I don't know if I'd heard him talk about having fun during the last 2 seasons. So that leads me to believe that he knows what he's got cooking, and I think he knows the ingredients are a little bit different than the last 2 seasons, and he's projecting a little bit, I believe. And we got to wait and see. I don't think we're going to learn week 1, week 2, week 3, but we will learn week 4 through week 8 about this bunch. And I think what's really exciting is these are rentals, right? These are guys who are coming to finish their career, trying to give themselves a good shot to get to the NFL, give you a chance to win a championship. So you've got to have talent that is developing behind them, playing behind them. What concerned me last year was the receiver was such an issue, and yet Penn State seemed scared to go beyond those top 4. It was Julian Fleming, Omari Evans, Liam Clifford, Harrison Wallace, nobody else. And so to me, can they go 5, 6 deep this time? Can it be a Tyseer Denmark who's got freshman eligibility? Kobe Howard, everyone is raving about this kid and what he's done. And he really could be that first guy since way back in 2020 to show up on the first game and look like he belongs on the field as a freshman receiver. You got to go back to Parker Washington and Keandre Lambert-Smith, 2 guys who are in the NFL this year, for the last time we saw a freshman receiver show up and make that kind of an impact. So to me, if you marry those 2 things, transfer players who are ready to fill roles right now and help you succeed in 2025, and then maybe some burgeoning talent that's on the come up, and you can really not rush on the field, but utilize in different ways with smaller rep counts, and then you set up for them to get to 2026 and feel like you have the homegrown talent. Because let's be honest, they clearly weren't confident they had the homegrown talent to put together a strong receiver group at the top of the depth chart. That's why they went out to the transfer portal.
Yep. I love you bringing up Kobe Howard. Like I said, you got a couple guys, Lyric Samuel, some of those younger guys that I think, are going to be good, but Kobe Howard has really shown himself. And I think could already take the label as maybe the shiftiest. I mean, Devontae Ross might have a word, but could already be the shiftiest guy in that wide receiver room as a true freshman. So excited. I can't imagine Coach Franklin was too happy that it leaked, but he put out on TikTok some practice highlights, and he looked really good and shifty in those. And
he plays pissed off over here. He's a guy who plays pissed off, and I think they've had too few of those guys as a receiver.
Been waiting for that as a receiver. Someone that's angry, wants to make plays. That's what Drew Aller needs, I think, to take that next step. Ty, let's take a zoom out a little bit from like the depth chart in these teams. 2 biggest games, maybe in Penn State regular season history. I think you could say that in so many different years, but it really feels that way this year. Oregon week 5, Ohio State week 10. Interesting thing that we have a bye week before both of them this year. So I'm kind of curious to see how that is going to pan out. But I mean, what are your thoughts coming in this year? I got to ask, are you a natty or bust guy at this moment?
An LTFI guy?
An LTFI guy.
I mean, I think it's hard not to based on when you see the team. I've covered this team 9 years now, and so I'm just basing it off of, what's the data in front of me. Well, the data in front of me is they just paid a coordinator more than anyone in college football history has ever paid a coordinator. The data in front of me is that from an NIL perspective, they stepped up to the plate to be able to help retain these guys. These guys aren't just back because they love Penn State. They're also back because they're getting taken care of. And so, to me, when you see all those pieces in play, I think there's a really, and by the way, Stan Drayton, really known as maybe the most respected running backs coach in college football circles. And so to replace Jaywan Sider, who felt like, how do you possibly upgrade a guy that was that kind of loved around campus and loved by his team? Well, you bring it in Stan Drayton, and it sounds like there's been a lot of elevated efforts with Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, even in their 4th year. So I'm definitely thinking that they got to get to the finish line and be in that conversation. Otherwise, something really went wrong from an injury standpoint, or there's going to be a lot of answers to come up with for James Franklin when he does his debriefing with Pat Kraft come January. If they fall short of getting to the playoff, obviously that's going to be a huge issue. If they get to the playoff, that's not going to appease anybody. It even didn't appease anybody last year. I thought maybe just getting the playoff would kind of scratch that itch. People were not satisfied with the results, and you understand why. So I think based on what they're saying, when you were on the team, everybody liked to talk about 1-0. Now they're talking about national championships. When you were on the team, every time we try to talk about Ohio State matchup down the road, it would be, no, we got to focus on whoever. We got to focus on Nevada.
Right.
Now they're saying, no, we want to win the title. We want to be the best team in the country. So I think the fact that they're putting their chest out with it, saying it out loud like that, it's got to be championship or bust for this team. You got to at least get to that title game. I won't fault you if you lose a great national championship game, but get to that game. The pinnacle of the sport, give James Franklin a chance to get to that mountaintop with this program, and then from there, we'll see.
I like that you made that point. I am so with you on the point that, if you win the Natty or, it's whatever, but you got to get to that game.
Mm-hmm.
Get to that fight. If, like you said, if it's a great game and you lose, it is what it is. But I think you're right. Anything short of what we did last year, you almost have to label it a disappointment. It's hard not to. And I'm curious your take on this. I've had people say, hey, we can lose Oregon and Ohio State and still make it as even a 10, 11, 12 seed. I feel like if we don't win one of those games, we'll make it. But, I just don't think we're going to – you can't get over that mental hurdle. I feel like if we can't do that in one of those two games, I don't see how we do it in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
I would have concerns about the psyche of the locker room and the psyche of the team and their ability to rise to that occasion. I love the way they responded immediately after the loss to Ohio State last year. Everybody, to a man that I talked to after that game, was like, we want to see them again. We can see them again. We can see them whether it's Big Ten championship game or down the road in the playoff. They were motivated. They were angry. But I think to be cool with losing those two games just because you get to the playoffs, no one's going to be cool with it. And I think ultimately, if you get to the finish line, you rack up 10 wins, but you don't beat Oregon, you don't beat Ohio State, I'd imagine there will be some creeping self-doubt in the back of their minds, because you're going to have guys who are sixth-year players like a Nick Dawkins who've never beaten Ohio State. And when you have a locker room who's never experienced that and had that taste, I think it can be a little bit harder to actually taste it.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. It feels like it is now or never, and kind of, if not now, when will it ever be for Penn State? And, we even talking a little bit about it is after this year, you look at what talent is moving on player-wise, it's a lot, almost the entire offense, including the offensive line, some big stars on defense, and it starts, even some coaching staff guys that were very close to leaving that came back. So it kind of feels like that last dance for the Chicago Bulls, where it's like, all right, what? Well, if we don't win now, it's over. So we better win right now. So I'm excited to see kind of where we go from here. Hopefully, it's going to be a great year. Tyler, I want to turn over real quick. Talk a little bit about you and your journey. We always like to showcase that a little bit. I'm curious. So, like I said, I've known you since 8th grade, but how did you get here? I honestly didn't know until I started doing my research for this interview that you were on the Rutgers recruiting staff.
Yes.
How did that start? What was the beginning workings of your career?
Yeah, the origins, I guess, were my high school coach. My senior year, we got a new coach. He was 25 years old, and he had just come in from a player development job up at Rutgers. He worked for Schiano. Okay. I was good enough to play Division III ball in New Jersey if I wanted to. I didn't want to go to college just to play football. I wanted to be a sports journalism major, and I knew I wanted to go to Rutgers. And so I made that decision. Once he knew I was leaning to Rutgers, he said, want me to reach back to some connections? I got an interview up there when I went up for some placement testing. I went to the football facility, did an interview, and pretty quickly we were like, when you come up for, you're part of you're going to be part of the process. I was a gopher. I mean, for the first year I was a gopher. I was, shoveling snow off of Greg Schiano's stoop so parents could come in for their, for their mixers and so they could, have some drinks during official visit weekends. I was making, shuttle runs up to the airport in Newark to bring kids in who were flying up to Florida to do official visits. I was, doing all sorts of stuff, but I got to be out there every day on the practice field. I got to break down a lot of film for the coaches, breaking down raw high school film into highlights, and then you'd give them to the position coaches, and they would ultimately determine if it was an offerable kid or if there was more interest there. And I think the biggest thing for me was just spending a full year for 3 years in that kind of a role, was just understanding how much work goes into trying to be at your best for 12 games out of the year, 12 days out of the year, the 365-day a year effort that goes into that. And, Greg Schiano, Still very passionate. Back then, I would say he was a whole different level of intensity. And so that's you could feel that all the way through. But it was a great experience for me. It taught me a lot about what it takes to hustle in this sport. And it also taught me that when it came down to it, I was coming up toward graduation, Landon, and I knew I could probably stay on, work at Rutgers, be a recruiting staffer, operations staffer, take that course. But I also knew what that life looked like. I saw kids coming in to visit their dads in their offices. I saw, that kind of feeling like if you leave early and it's 7 p.m., if you're the first guy out, you're going to get shunned, and there's kind of that feeling in the building that you're supposed to always be in the office. And so to me, I was like, I've always wanted to be a sports journalist since I was middle school age. And so I need to be true to that. I went and I did some things at the end of my college career up in New York City to kind of do that, get a platform going. And I moved out to Southern California after I graduated, and I started with some prep coverage out in Orange County, Los Angeles County. Great football, great basketball, great baseball. And I ended up moving home, and the way I kind of got back into the college football world was I was about 25, 26, and I got a call from Bleacher Report. An editor that I had worked with out in California was then working for them. He said they were thinking about launching this football recruiting segment of their site. And they did it in a big way. And so I was on board as their first full-time recruiting reporter. We ended up adding a couple more guys. And then this was a little bit before your time, Landon, but you may remember we had this big series of commitment videos at Bleacher Report where it was really before they were big. And so
I do remember
I
that
was
a
in on
little
it. One of them was Fred Hansard, who came to Penn State. When he committed to Florida, though, we did one for him.
Oh, boy.
But I was probably involved in quite a few of those, and ultimately, Bleacher Report ended up kind of shifting toward video and away from writing, and so I didn't really have a role as much anymore. And I ended up kind of in a free agency status. I had just gotten married. I was actually unemployed when we were on our honeymoon trying to figure things out.
That must have been just a little stressful.
It was a little stressful, but I had faith in my abilities, and I did have a lot of suitors, and I got flown down to Atlanta for an opportunity with Cox Media Group at the time. They presented a few different beats. They said Michigan, Tennessee, Penn State. What do you think? How would you order these? Which one would you want to cover? And this is going to be as covering recruiting and covering the team, which I had never done. So I thought, well, Tennessee, their coach is going to get fired. And that's a whole different culture shock for me and my wife to move down there. She's from New York City. And then I'm thinking, well, Michigan, Harbaugh's kind of an interesting dude to deal with on a daily basis. And that's more of a plane ride than a car ride. So we said Penn State. And the 2017 spring game, first day I got paid to cover Penn State, was my first time ever in Happy Valley. Got lost on my way trying to find campus, went to Beaver Stadium, watched Tommy Stevens sling it around a little bit. And, within the next few months, my wife and I relocated here. And it's hard to believe this will be season number 9 for me on the Penn State beat. I obviously have transitioned to 24/7 Sports because my other job that brought me here, kerplunk, after 1 year, they totally shut down their whole Big Ten, SEC, college football coverage initiative. So to get on a big call after you convinced your wife to move from New York City to central Pennsylvania, and then I got to get off that call and be like, well, they decided that this job doesn't exist anymore. Not great. All things, though, I've talked about this with you before. One door closes, another door opens. By the time my severance pay was done, I was locked into a full-time position with 24/7 Sports. And I've had a few different contract extensions since then. Been a great company to work for, great people to work with. And honestly, did not think I would be spending this chunk of my life here at Penn State. I spent 4 years at Rutgers, and it was a really pivotal time for me. I've more than doubled that here, and it's hard to imagine, and I'm really appreciative for the community, for the opportunity, and again, you're just not ever sure where life is going to lead you. And so from that time at Rutgers to where I am now, and I'll mention this because I want to toot our horn a little bit from what happened at Rutgers back then. This was 06, 07, 08. So the Rutgers today and in the years past, a little bit different.
All I know is Rutgers being bad. They're not good.
So 2006, 2007, both years, Rutgers inside the AP Top 25. My first year, inside the AP Top 10, I should specify, both of those years. And my first year with the program, we reached November unbeaten, then beat the number 2 team in the country on our home field, and so it was a lot happening at that time. Ray Rice was kind of the catalyst for us from a player standpoint, but
I always remember Ray Rice from Rutgers as a Steelers fan. I remember
with the Ravens, and and then you had Devin and Jason McCourty, and there were pieces there, but it was a lot of hustlers. There was a lot of 3 stars. It was a lot of guys who weren't recruited by Penn State, and so it was pretty cool to see that. And I know people are like, "Oh my God, he said we about Rutgers." When I talk about Rutgers back then, when I was spending 60 hours in that office, more time in the office campus than I was in my dorm room. It's a weak conversation. Now it's not a weak conversation. It's
Right.
Rutgers. But back then I still do hold that pretty close to my chest, those few years. Because you know what it's like, whether you're a player, a support staff, or anything, you sweat and you grind and you sacrifice a lot of time with the people that you love. And so that was really, it was pretty important for me to experience that, because I have kind of a different vantage point of maybe what happens for all the people inside that building at Penn State and what actually they're going through from March through May and all these points of the year where people aren't all that interested. They're still having to punch that clock.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think sometimes people are like, oh, I'm not thinking about them, so they're not working. It's like that mindset. When that is, that you're like, that is the grind time. That's some of the hardest hours and long days. That's where fall. So you kind of see all the work that comes to fruition in the fall is built through then, and landing guys like Chaz Coleman and finding those little gems is through guys staying back, putting together, those cut ups and saying, hey, coach, take a look at this guy. So no, that's awesome. Tyler, I appreciate you coming on, talking a little bit of Penn State football preview, but also sharing a little bit of your story. I think it's awesome. One of my favorites on the beat, man. Definitely will have you on here again throughout the season. So we will bug Tyler to get him on. Don't worry. And no, it's always great talking with you once again. First guy, my first ever interview. I just want to let you know, I stared at that interview for like probably all night that you released it on the way back. And we were like on the team bus coming back with Pilati at the time, was my high school team.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I don't think the smile left my face of like, dude, I have an article about me. And then just got all these Penn State. And I remember Tyler said to me, he's like, you're going to get a couple Penn State followers. And then I had like, at the time, I had like 300 new followers. And then like, as a still not even ninth grade, I was like, what the heck? It was awesome. So once again, thanks for getting
I wasn't wasting my time. I knew I was talking to someone worth talking to. And by the way, this is a full circle moment. My hair's grayer than it was back then, but I'm glad to be able to be on the receiving end of an interview with you. I'm so excited to see you building this, empire in the media world very early in your life, and I'm glad you have all the support out there. Keep supporting him because he's killing it, and really, really excited for you.
No doubt, appreciate you, Tyler. Make sure you guys go check out Lions 24/7 too. Great freaking work over there. You, Mark, the whole gang, you guys kill it. So make sure to go over there, subscribe, follow them on Twitter, all of that. Thank you again to Bobby Rail Honda of State College for sponsoring this video. Until next time, peace.